An hour before her wedding, my sister-in-law poured red wine down the only dress I own. You never learn. Stand by the door and take the coats. Nobody's here to look at you. Mom told me to smile. I did. Then I made one call. When the blonde woman in the long red dress walked through the church doors, the groom fainted. My name is Nadine Ruddick. I'm 38 years old, and for 11 years I have been a court-appointed process server in Trumbull County, Ohio. 4,106 people found and handed a folded stack of papers. That's the whole job. I find people who do not want to be found, and I put the paper in their hand, and I sign my name to say I did it. The man standing at that altar in a rented gray suit had been dodging service for 2 years and 4 months. I know the exact number because I'm the one who wrote "not found" on his file 8 months earlier and mailed it back to a legal aid attorney in Youngstown who was running out of time. He was about to marry my husband's sister. Nobody in that church knew that except me. And I had tried twice to tell them. Let me start with the wine, because that's the part everybody asks about. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock on a Saturday in April at Zion Lutheran on Todd Avenue in Warren. Kimber wanted an afternoon wedding so the pictures outside would have that soft light she'd been saving on her phone since Christmas. The bridal room at Zion is really just the choir room with a folding screen in the corner and a coffee maker that's been there since the 80s. Quick pause before we continue. I'm Clara, the woman behind this channel. I write these stories because I love that little moment when strangers from different places end up feeling the same thing. If this one already pulled you in, stay with me. It goes deeper from here. The bridal room at Zion is really just the choir room with a folding screen in the corner and a coffee maker that's been there since the 80s. There were 6 women in it. Kimber, her 3 girlfriends from the salon, Charlene, my mother-in-law, and me. I wasn't in the wedding. I'd been in it until 9 days before, when Kimber called and told me she'd rather have Ashlyn, who does her lashes, because Ashlyn's arms photograph better in cap sleeves. That's the reason she gave. Ashlyn's arms. So I came in the beige dress. It's the only dress I own. That's not a figure of speech. I work in boots and canvas pants. I sit in a truck. I knock on doors in neighborhoods where people watch the truck from behind a curtain before they decide whether to open. I have never once in 11 years had a reason to own a second dress. Charlene bought me that one. 2012, a consignment place on Mahoning Avenue that isn't there anymore, $22. It's beige with a thin cream stripe and 3 buttons at the throat. I got married in it. I buried my mother-in-law's brother in it. I wore it to Kimber's high school graduation and to the christening of 2 of her cousins' babies. And every single time I put it on, I felt like I had been let into something. At 3 o'clock, 1 hour before the ceremony, Kimber was sitting in a folding chair with her veil across her lap and a plastic cup of red wine in her hand. Someone had brought a bottle from the Giant Eagle on Elm. She had been drinking it since 1:30, and she was in that particular mood she gets in, the bright one, where everything sounds like a joke until it isn't. She looked at me and said, "Is that the dress?" I said, "It's the dress." And she said, "God, Nadine." And she laughed. And she stood up and she tipped the cup. She did it slowly. That's what I want you to understand. She didn't stumble. She didn't wave her arm. There was no accident in it. She held that cup out at chest height and turned her wrist, and the wine came down the front of me from the top button to the hem, and it soaked in cold, and it went dark immediately. 2 of her girlfriends made a sound. Ashlyn put her hand over her mouth. Nobody moved. Kimber said, "You never learn. Stand by the door and take the coats. Nobody's here to look at you." And I turned to Charlene. I need to tell you who Charlene is, because otherwise, this is just a story about a mean woman in a wedding dress. And it isn't. Charlene Ruddick is 64 years old. She ran the kitchen at Turner Middle School for 29 years. When I was 24, I had been sleeping in a 1998 Grand Am in the back lot of the laundromat on North Park for 11 days. My mother had died in March of that year, and there wasn't anybody after that. Wes and I had been dating 4 months. He told his mother, and she came and got me herself. Drove the Grand Am back to her house, with me following in her Buick, and she made me eat 2 eggs and a piece of toast, standing at the counter because I wouldn't sit down. She gave me a bathrobe that night, green terry cloth with a burn mark on the sleeve from an iron. And when I said thank you, Mrs. Ruddick, she said, "Don't do that. You call me Mom." I called her Mom for 14 years. I mean that literally. I don't think I said the word Charlene out loud in that house more than 5 times in 14 years. So I turned to her in the choir room at Zion Lutheran with wine running down me, and I said, "Mom." And she looked at the wine, and she looked at her daughter, and she said, "Smile, Nadine. It's her day." I smiled. That's the part I still think about, not the wine, the smiling. I have a good face for this work. Flat, pleasant, forgettable, the face of a woman delivering a package. And I put it on right there in that room, and I said, "Of course." And I picked up my tote bag off the floor, and I walked out into the vestibule, and I stood behind the coat table. There were 41 coats on that rack by 3:30. April in Ohio, everybody brings one. I hung every single one of them, and I handed out the little paper tags with the numbers on them, and I said good afternoon, and welcome, and let me take that for you, to people who had been at my wedding. Now let me back all the way up to March of the year before, because none of what happened at 411 that afternoon was luck. I work for Hollister Legal Support. It's 2 rooms and a bathroom above a tax preparer on Courthouse Square in Warren. Ida Hollister owns it. She's 63, she has smoked since she was 19, and she hired me off a temp desk in 2014 because, she said, I had the 2 things you can't teach. I don't get bored, and I don't get scared at doors. Here's what people think process servers do. They think we jump out of bushes and yell, "You've been served." That's television. What we actually do is paperwork and patience. A law firm or a court or a legal aid office hands us a packet, a summons, a copy of the petition, sometimes an order. And our job is to put that packet in the hand of a specific human being, and then to swear an affidavit describing exactly how and when and what he was wearing and how tall he was. Because if that affidavit is wrong, the case dies. Not the case's fault, mine. The other half of the job is skip tracing. Finding. I run addresses, I run utility connections and dog licenses, and the property tax rolls and the county's own docket search. All of it public, all of it free or nearly free. And I sit outside a duplex at 5:40 in the morning with a coffee, and I watch to see whose truck leaves. I keep a logbook. Ida made me start it my first month. It's a black hardcover, 1 line per attempt. Date, time, address, what happened. 22 of them on the shelf in the file room now, filled front to back. I am telling you about the logbook because the logbook is the whole story. On the 11th of March, a Tuesday, I got an assignment out of Community Legal Aid in Youngstown. Attorney of record, Roz Vanderhoof. The packet was a paternity and support petition, Trumbull County Juvenile Court, case number JV-24-0917. The respondent's name on the summons was Everly, Beauregard G. Jr. Date of birth, April 2nd, 1991. Last known address, a brick duplex on Sodom Hutchings Road in Girard. Attempt 1, March 11th, 6:05 p.m. Nobody home. Attempt 2, March 13th, 7:20 a.m. Nobody home. Attempt 3, March 16th, a Saturday, 11:40 in the morning. There was a black Silverado in the drive with a magnetic sign on the door for a SIL coating company. I knocked, and a man opened that door as far as the chain would let him, and I saw a strip of his face. And I said the sentence I have said 4,000 times. I'm looking for Beau Everly. And he smiled at me through the gap in that door, and he said, "He don't live here no more, hun. Moved down to Kentucky, I think." I wrote it down in the truck. I still have the line. Male, 30s, brown hair, approximately 6 feet 0, scar through left eyebrow, refused to give name, states subject relocated to Kentucky. He was wearing a gray t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, and he had a laugh at the end of it, an easy one, 3 notes, like he was letting me in on something. I attempted that address 4 more times over 11 days. On the 28th of March, I filed the affidavit of non-service, and I mailed the packet back to Roz Vanderhoof's office in Youngstown with the box checked that says the respondent could not be located. And I moved on to the next one because I had 19 other files that week, and a 4-year-old in Youngstown was not my 4-year-old. 5 months later, on the second Sunday in August, Charlene called and said Kimber was bringing somebody to dinner and everybody had to be nice. He came in the back door off the driveway, the way family comes in. 6 foot, brown hair, a bottle of wine in his hand for Charlene, and a coffee cake for the table. And Kimber hanging off his arm like she'd won something at a fair. She said, "Everybody, this is Grant." And he shook my husband's hand, and he told a story about a paving crew in Sharon that got the truck stuck. And at the end of it, he laughed. 3 notes. Easy. Letting me in on something. I was holding a cup of coffee, and I did not put it down because if I had put it down, they would have seen my hand. I stayed at that table for 2 more hours. Charlene made a pork roast and the good potatoes, the ones with the paprika, which she only does when she's showing off for somebody. Kimber sat with her chair turned sideways, so her knee touched his the whole meal. Wes asked him about the paving business, and Grant said territory sales, mostly commercial lots, church lots, apartment complexes, and he said it the way a man says something he's good at. The kitchen at Charlene's has one overhead light and a lamp on the counter, and he sat with his back to the window, and I could not see his left eyebrow all night. I tried 3 times. I got up for water I didn't want. I asked him to pass the rolls that were already next to me. Every time he turned, the light went the wrong way. He was good with Charlene. That's the thing nobody tells you about men like that. He carried her water softener salt down to the basement without being asked. He called her Miss Charlene. He asked about the middle school kitchen and let her tell the story about the tornado drill in 2009. And he laughed in the right place. And Charlene's whole face went young. In the car going home, Wes said, "See? He's fine. He's a good one." I said, "Where's he from?" Wes said, "Around. Youngstown, I think." Kimber said he's got family down in Kentucky. I looked out the window at the sheets on Elm Road, and I didn't say anything for the rest of the drive. Monday morning, I went in early and I opened the file room. Ida keeps returns for 12 months. That's her rule, not the court's. Every packet that comes back to us, unserved, gets photocopied, front to back, and boxed by month with a rubber band, because Ida got burned in 1997, and she has never once trusted a mailroom since. The March box was on the 3rd shelf. I found it in about 4 minutes. Everly. Beauregard G. Jr. Date of birth, April 2nd, 1991. Trumbull County Juvenile Court, JV-24-0917. Roz Vanderhoof's office had included a photo with the packet, which legal aid almost never does. It was a bad one. Somebody had copied a driver's license onto plain paper and then copied the copy, so it was mostly gray, and the man in it had short hair and a square jaw, and he was about 4 years younger than the man who had eaten pork roast 8 feet from me the day before. 80%. That's where I was. 80% is nothing. 80% is a woman who wants to be right. So I did the only thing I'm actually good at. I went to the public record. Trumbull County has an online docket. Anybody can use it. You don't need a login, and you don't need a reason, and there is no fee. I have sat in a truck outside a Wendy's and pulled a docket on my phone for a bail bondsman 100 times. It is not a secret, and it is not a favor, and it is not, and I want to be clear about this, anything I got from my job just taught me where the button is. Case JV-24-0917, filed October of the year before last. Petitioner, Lindquist Shay M., on behalf of minor child, JL, date of birth 2021. Respondent, Everly Beauregard G. Jr. Complaint to establish paternity and for an order of support. And under it, the whole sad history of a case that never got off the ground. Summons issued. Summons returned, unserved. Alias summons issued. Alias summons returned, unserved. Residence service attempted, returned by post office, unable to forward. Certified mail refused. And then my own line in the record, dated the 28th of March. Affidavit of non-service filed. Mine. My name is in that docket. N. Ruddick, appointed process server. I sat in that file room with the box on my knees until Ida came in at 9 and hollered up the stairs about the coffee. I want to explain something about the next 4 months, because if I don't, the rest of it won't make sense to you. I did not go to anyone in August. I didn't go in September either. Part of that is the job. When you serve papers for a living, you learn very fast that you are wrong about people constantly. I have gone to a house sure that a man was hiding in the garage and he'd been dead 9 weeks. I have followed a woman's truck for 4 days, and it was her sister's truck. A laugh is not evidence. A build is not evidence. If I walked into Charlene Ruddick's kitchen and blew up her daughter's life on the strength of a laugh, I would deserve everything that came after. And part of it, the honest part, is that I watched them be happy, and I did not want to be the one. Because Grant Everly was the best thing that had ever come through that back door. In October, the furnace at Charlene's went out. It's a 1994 unit in a house she has lived in since Wes was 6. The quote was $4,300, and Charlene said she'd wear a sweater until spring, and she meant it. She'd have done it. Grant paid for it, wrote a check standing in the driveway, and told her it was a Christmas present and to stop talking about it. She cried at the sink. He bought Wes a chop saw. He got Kimber's transmission looked at by a guy he knew in Niles. When Charlene's neighbor's kid needed somebody to sponsor his hockey jersey, Grant put $150 on it and told them to put the salon's name on there instead of his. And Kimber was happy. I have known that girl since she was 15 years old, and I had never once seen her like that. Kimber Ruddick is not a nice person, and I'm not going to pretend she is, but she is a person. And she had spent her 20s with a series of men who took her money and slept on her couch. And now, here was one who fixed things. I'll tell you one more thing about Kimber, and then I'll be done being fair to her. The morning I married her brother, I was in Charlene's bathroom trying to do something with my hair, and I could not do it. And I was 24, and my mother was 7 months dead. And there was nobody to do it for me. Kimber was 15. She came in and sat me on the edge of the tub, and she did my hair in a French braid without saying one word about it. And when she was done, she took off her own little gold hoops and put them in my hand and said, "Beige needs gold." I still have those earrings. I was wearing them under my hair the day she poured the wine. In December, the photographer put the engagement pictures up on her website. Kimber sent the link to the family group thread at 11 at night with about 9 exclamation points. I opened them on my laptop at the kitchen table with Wes asleep upstairs. 38 images. They'd done them out at Mosquito Lake in the good light, and the 7th one was a close-up. His face turned 3/4 toward the camera, laughing at something off to the left. Full resolution. Bigger than life. There was a scar running up through his left eyebrow, splitting the hair about 1.25 inches, old and white. Male, 30s, brown hair, approximately 6 feet 0, scar through left eyebrow. I sat there a long time. Then I went upstairs and I woke my husband up. Wes is not a cruel man. I need you to know that too. He's 41. He drives a ready-mix truck for a concrete company out on 45. He gets up at 4:20 every morning of his life, and he has never raised his voice at me in 14 years. That was the problem. He didn't raise it that night either. He sat up, against the headboard, and I told him all of it. The March file, the chain on the door, the Kentucky line, the docket, the scar. He listened the whole way through. He didn't interrupt. Then he said, "So you want me to tell my sister her guy's got a kid he's hiding, and the proof is a laugh and an eyebrow?" I said, "The proof is a public court case with his name and his birthday on it." And Wes said, "The thing I've turned over about 900 times since." He said, "Deanie, you knock on doors for a living. You don't get to decide who people are." He wasn't sneering. He said it kindly. He said it the way you'd move something out of somebody's way. And then he turned over and set the alarm for 4:20. And I lay there in the dark next to him, doing math about a 4-year-old in Youngstown that I had never seen. I went to Charlene on Christmas Eve. They do it big at that house. Charlene does the ham and the pierogies her mother taught her, and everybody comes at 6. And there's a folding table in the living room for the kids. Grant carved. Kimber sat on the arm of his chair. At about 8:30, she stood up and tapped a fork on a glass and announced 2 things. First, that they'd set the date, April 12th, Zion Lutheran, 4 o'clock. And second, that they were moving. Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Grant had gotten the Southern Territory. The Monday after the wedding, the 14th, a U-Haul, and both their cars, and gone. Kimber was already talking about a house with a porch. Everybody yelled. Charlene got up and held her daughter's face in both hands. I went into the kitchen and I dried dishes until it thinned out. And when Charlene came in for the foil, I said, "Mom, I have to tell you something about Grant." She was reaching into the drawer under the phone. The green robe was still on the hook behind the kitchen door, where it has hung since 2012. I told her, not all of it. The case number, the birthday, the child, the fact that a woman in Youngstown had been trying for 2 years to find him. I said I would put the docket on her phone right there, and she could read it herself with her own eyes. It takes 40 seconds. Anybody can do it. Charlene shut the drawer. She said, "Don't you dare." She said it very quietly because there were 19 people in the next room. She said, "That girl has had 2 good things happen to her in her whole life, and you want to take one of them off the table on Christmas Eve." And then she said, "I know you've had it hard, Nadine. I know what I picked you up out of. But that doesn't make you the only person in this house who tells the truth." I said, "Mom, I'm asking you to look at 40 seconds of a public website." And Charlene Ruddick, who gave me a bathrobe and told me to call her mom, looked at me and said, "If you say one word of this to Kimber, you can stay home." I went out and sat in my truck in her driveway with the engine off and my coat still on the hook inside. I opened the docket on my phone. Not because I expected anything, because it's what my hands do. There was a new entry, filed December 19th, 6 days before, by the court on its own motion. Notice, case set for review 5/2 for failure to perfect service. Subject to dismissal. I sat there in the cold and I did the arithmetic, the way I do it for any file. Wedding, April 12th. U-Haul to Tennessee, April 14th. Case dismissed and gone, May 2nd. 108 days. And after the 14th, he would be 460 miles away in a state where I have no appointment, no standing, and no idea where he sleeps. Which meant there was exactly 1 room left in the world where I knew, to the minute, where Bo Everly was going to be standing. I called Community Legal Aid on the 2nd of January at 8:58 in the morning, 2 minutes before they opened, and I got a recording. If you have ever tried to reach a legal aid attorney, you know what the next 11 days were. Roz Vanderhoff carries something like 200 open files. She has 1 paralegal. She is in a courtroom in one of 4 counties most mornings, and on the phone with a client's landlord most afternoons, and the voicemail box for her extension had been full since before Thanksgiving. I left a message with the front desk on the 2nd, on the 6th, on the 9th, on the 14th. Every time I said the same 9 words, because it's the only thing I had that would mean anything to that office. This is the process server on JV-24-0 0917. On the 22nd of January, at 4:10 in the afternoon, with me sitting in the truck outside a body shop in Hubbard, waiting on a subpoena, a recipient who never came out, my phone rang from a Youngstown number. "This is Roz Vanderhoof." "Who am I talking to?" I said. "Nadine Ruddick, Hollister Legal Support, Warren. I'm the one who filed the non-service on Everly last March." There was a pause, and I heard her chair move. She was careful with me, and she should have been. She would not confirm one detail about her client. She wouldn't tell me the child's name. Every question I asked, she answered with a version of, "I can't discuss that." And I liked her more each time she said it. Finally, she said, "Ms. Reddick, why are you calling me 9 months later about a file you closed?" I said, "Because I know where he's going to be." She said, "Where?" And I said, "Zion Lutheran Church, Todd Avenue, Warren, April 12th, 4 o'clock. He'll be at the front of the sanctuary in a rented suit, marrying my husband's sister. On the 14th, he's driving to Tennessee." Roz Vanderhoof did not say anything for about 6 seconds. Then she said a word I won't repeat, and then she said, "Hold on, I'm getting the file." Here's what she told me once she had it open, and none of it was good. The summons was dead. In Ohio, a summons doesn't stay alive forever, waiting for somebody to catch up with a man. Hers had issued, come back, issued again as an alias, come back again, and after my affidavit in March, nothing further had been requested. To send anybody after him now, she had to file a praesibe asking the clerk to issue a fresh alias summons, and the clerk had to actually issue it, and only then does a packet exist that a server is legally allowed to hand anybody. Before that, all I'd be handing him is paper. Paper isn't service. Paper is litter. And the second problem was worse. Roz said, "I have to talk to my client before I file anything." And I haven't been able to reach my client since August. Shay Lindquist had moved. The address on the petition was a rental in Struthers, and the mail had come back twice, unable to forward. The phone number in the file was disconnected. The court had a review date of May 2nd and a lawyer who could not find the woman who had filed the case. I sat in that truck outside the body shop and I started laughing, and Roz said, "What?" I said, "Ms. Vanderhoof, finding people is the entire thing I do. I found her in 9 days, and every step of it is something you could do at a library." The petition listed the Struthers address. The Mahoning County Auditor's site gave me the parcel and the owner's name, a landlord with 14 properties. I called him about a rental listing I had no intention of taking, and he complained for 6 minutes about turnover and mentioned, without me asking, that the girl in the upstairs unit had gone over to boardmen when her hours changed. The Board of Elections shows registration updates, and it's public and it's searchable. And it took me under a minute once I had the county right. Sherwood Avenue, Boardman. Then I did the part that isn't research. I wrote a letter by hand, on paper, and I mailed it. Because a woman who has spent 2 years being chased by nothing but bad news does not answer unknown numbers. I wrote, "My name is Nadine. I am the process server who could not find Beau Everly for you last March. I know where he is. Your lawyer is trying to reach you. Please call her or call me, and I will come to you." She called me at 10:40 at night on the 4th of February. We met on the 8th, a Saturday morning, at the Elmton on Belmont Avenue, in the back booth by the pie case. Shay Lindquist is 31. She's blonde, the real kind, gone a little dark at the roots because nobody has time. And she is about my height, and she came in wearing scrubs because she'd worked the 4 a.m. shift at a dialysis clinic and had 2 hours before she had to sleep. She's a patient care tech. She sticks needles in people's arms 4 days a week, starting at 4 in the morning. She had a little girl with her. Josie Lindquist was 4 years and 3 months old that day. She had a coloring book and 11 crayons in a sandwich bag, and she was doing a whole page in only the green ones because green was the situation that week. Shay put a folder on the table before she said hello. She'd kept everything. That's the part that got me. This woman, with no lawyer's training and no time and no money, had built the exact file I would have built. 14 text messages sent to a number that stopped delivering in 2022. A certified letter, returned, refused. A printout of the hospital birth worksheet with the father's section left blank. A page of her own handwriting listing every address she'd heard he might be at, with the dates, in a column, like a log. She said, "I know how it looks. A girl chasing a guy for money." I said, "It doesn't look like that to me at all." And she said, "It's not the money." I mean, it is. I make $16.60 an hour and daycare is $900. But that's not the reason I filed. Then she took out a folded sheet of paper from Akron Children's Hospital. Josie has a murmur. It's probably nothing. Probably. They found it at her 3-year checkup, and they sent her to pediatric cardiology. And cardiology sent home an intake packet, and that packet has a family history grid on the second page. 2 columns, maternal, paternal. Shay had filled the left column in blue ink all the way down. Her mother's blood pressure, her grandfather's stents, an aunt with a valve replaced at 51. The right column was empty, every line. She said, "The nurse told me to just do my best. I've done my best. My best is a blank half of a page they hand back to me every single appointment for the rest of her life." Then she said, "I need a judge to make him sit in a chair and answer 12 questions about his family's hearts." Josie leaned over and said something to her mother about the green crayon being almost gone, and Shay said something back, and the kid laughed. 3 notes. Easy. Like she was letting you in on something. I had to look at the pie case for a while. I did one more thing before I went back to Roz, and it's the thing that ended any doubt I had left about whether I was the villain in this. Court dockets are county by county. I'd only ever looked at Trumbull because Trumbull was where the case was. So on the 10th of February, I sat at my kitchen table and I ran the name in the counties that touch us. Mahoning, Columbiana, Ashtabula, Portage, Geauga. It's free. It's open. It took me most of an evening. Mahoning County, filed in 2019, complaint to establish paternity and for support. Petitioner, a woman named Danica Pfeiffer, on behalf of a minor child born in 2017. Respondent, Everly, Beauregard G. Jr., date of birth, April 2nd, 1991. Summons issued, returned, unserved. Alias summons issued, returned, unserved. Certified mail refused, dismissed, May of 2021, for a failure to perfect service. There's a little boy in Youngstown who is 7 years old. I called Roz the next morning and read her the case number. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "That's not a man running from women. That's a man who has learned exactly how far he has to stay from a clerk's office." Roz filed the press slip on the 13th of February, with her client's signature on the authorization, which she got in person at a dialysis clinic parking lot on Belmont Avenue at 6:15 in the morning. And then I went upstairs and told Ida Hollister everything, because I was not going to touch a summons in a church without the woman who trained me knowing exactly what I was doing. Ida listened to 11 minutes of it with a cigarette she wasn't allowed to smoke in that office burning in a coffee can on the windowsill. When I was done, she pulled a laminated card out of her desk. She's had it since the 90s. It's the card she makes every new server read out loud. She said, "Are you a party to this action?" I said, "No." "Do you have a financial interest in the outcome?" "No." "Are you an attorney for a party or an employee of one?" "No." "Are you 18 years of age or older and appointed by the court of this county?" "Yes." She said, "Then you can serve him." And she put the card down and looked at me over her glasses and said, "Now sit there and tell me whether you should." I said, "There's a 4-year-old with half a page." Ida said, "That's not what I asked you." She said, "Nadine, I've known you 11 years. You've got exactly one family. If you walk into that church with a summons in your bag, you will not have it anymore. Not the mother, not the sister, not the cousins, and I'd bet $100 not the husband either. They will not forgive you for being right. People never do." I said, "I know." She said, "Say the rest of it." And I said, "If I stand there and let him get in that U-Haul, then the woman who put me at that table when I had nothing raised a man-shaped hole into her family, and I held the door open for it." Ida picked up her coffee can and went and stood by the window. She said, "Alias, summons ought to issue in a couple weeks. Don't do one single thing until it's in your hand." 3 days later, my work phone rang at 9 at night from a number with a Sharon exchange. I answered it the way I answer everything after hours. Hollister Legal Support. And a voice I'd heard through a chain on a door said, "Nadine, hey, it's Grant." I said, "How'd you get this number?" He laughed. 3 notes. He said, "Miss Charlene says you've been telling stories about me." And then, friendly as anything, like he was recommending a mechanic, he said, "You know I drove past your office the other day. Little place over the tax guy on the square. Real pretty in the evening with the lamp on." I didn't yell at him, and I didn't hang up. I said, "Grant, I'm going to read you back what you just said so I get the spelling right." And I read it back to him, and he laughed once more, and the line went dead. Then I opened the black book and wrote it down. February 16th, 9:04 p.m., incoming, and the exchange, and the words in quotation marks, and my own name at the bottom. That is the entire difference between me and everybody else in this story. I don't get scared at doors. I write things down. Ida made me take it to the sheriff's office the next morning and file an information report. It's not a charge and it doesn't do anything, and the deputy who typed it told me as much. But there is now a piece of paper in a county computer with a date on it, and I have never in my life regretted a piece of paper with a date on it. I told Wes that night. I told him a man had called my work phone at 9 o'clock to mention that he'd driven past my office. Wes was in the recliner with his boots off. He said, "He was probably just messing with you." I said, "Wes." He said, "Deanie, he's marrying my sister in 8 weeks. Whatever you think is going on, can we get through it?" I want to be honest about my husband here. He didn't stop believing me because he thought I was a liar. He stopped believing me because believing me was going to cost him his mother. And the price of not believing me was only going to cost him me. He did that math the way men like that do it, in the recliner, without ever saying it out loud, and he got the answer he could afford. The alias summons took 26 days. Roz filed the precipice on February 13th. It came back from the clerk on the 21st because the caption listed the respondent's address as the Sodom Hutchings duplex, which the post office had already flagged as undeliverable. And the clerk's office won't issue to an address the record already shows is bad. Roz refiled with address unknown, personal service by appointed server on the 2nd of March. The clerk issued on the 11th. The packet came to Hollister Legal Support in the mail on Friday, March 14th at about 11 in the morning. Ida signed for it. Alias summons, a certified copy of the complaint to establish paternity and for an order of support and the standing juvenile court orders. Manila envelope, 12 pages, a rubber band around it. I want to say this next part very clearly, because there are people in my husband's family who to this day tell it a different way. I did not save it for the wedding. I tried to serve Beau Everly 4 times in the 28 days before that wedding, and I have the log entries, and Roz Vanderhoof has copies, and every one of them has a date and a time on it. March 15th, Saturday, 8:50 a.m. Kimber's apartment on Belmont Avenue in Niles. No Silverado. Kimber's neighbor, an older man scraping his windshield, told me the fella had gone down to Columbus for work Thursday. March 18th, Tuesday, 6:40 a.m. The yard of the SIL Coating Company off Route 46. There's a gate and a trailer office and a woman named Pam who runs the whole thing out of a swivel chair. She was pleasant. She told me Grant was a 1099 rep, not an employee, worked out of his truck, came into the yard maybe twice a month, and no. She couldn't give me a number, and she said it in the tone of somebody who has said it before. March 22nd, Saturday, 5:35 p.m. Charlene's house on Marion Street. Sunday dinner had gotten moved to Saturdays that spring. I parked at the curb, and I walked in the back door with the envelope inside my coat, and there were 10 people in that kitchen, and he was not one of them. Kimber was leaning on the counter. She looked at me, and she said, loud enough for the whole room, "He doesn't come when you're here anymore." Nobody corrected her. Charlene was at the stove. She turned the burner down, and she didn't turn around. March 29th, Saturday, 5:40 a.m., Belmont Avenue again. I sat there with a thermos for 4 hours, and the truck never came. I found out later he'd started parking on Cedar, 2 streets over, and walking the alley. That's a man who has been doing this for 6 years. That's not a guy who forgot to check his mail. That's a professional, and I know a professional when I'm looking at one, because I am one. By the end of March, the story about me had gotten out ahead of me, the way stories do in a family. Kimber's version was that I was jealous. Then it was that I was trying to ruin the wedding because my own marriage was dead. And then, sometime around the first week of April, it became the ugly one. The one somebody's cousin said out loud at a bridal shower I wasn't at, which was that I had a thing for Grant, and he'd turned me down. Charlene did not stop it. That's the sentence I'd carve on something if I had to pick one. Charlene Ruddick heard her daughter say that in her own living room, and Charlene Ruddick got up and got more ice. On the last day of March, somebody removed me from the family group thread. I never found out who. I just noticed on a Tuesday that I hadn't gotten a picture of anybody's dog in 4 days. On the 3rd of April, 9 days out, Kimber called me. She was in the car. I could hear the blinker. She said she'd been thinking about the pictures and that Ashlyn was going to do it instead because Ashlyn's arms photograph better in cap sleeves. I said, "Okay." She said, "You'll still come, right?" And there was a little hook of pleasure in it, and I heard it, and I said, "Of course I'll come." Then she said, "Just wear whatever you've got." Ida took the file off me on Monday the 7th. I knew it was coming. She called me into the front room, and she'd already put the packet in a fresh envelope and written a different name on the outside. She said, "I've been thinking about your affidavit." I said, "My affidavit's clean." She said, "Your affidavit is clean. And the first thing his lawyer will do when he walks into that courtroom is ask you, under oath, whether you are married to the bride's brother. And you will say yes. And it will not matter one bit legally, and it will matter enormously in that room. And some judge will spend 20 minutes on your marriage instead of 20 minutes on that man's daughter." She said, "Rudy takes it. Rudy Prewitt is 58 years old, and he has been serving papers in this county since 1994. He wears a tie to serve people. He says it makes them polite. He has, by his own count, failed to complete service 4 times in 31 years, and 2 of those were dead men." I slid the envelope across Ida's desk with 2 fingers, and Rudy picked it up and put it under his arm and said, "Don't worry about it, kid." The plan was simple, and it was a good plan. Rudy would take him in the parking lot at Zion before the ceremony, or if that didn't work, at the reception at the Elks on Elm Road, where there'd be 4 hours of a man standing still in a rented suit. I was out of it. I want that on the record, too. From the 7th of April, I did not have a summons, I did not have standing, and I did not have a job to do. This is why I love making these stories. People think silence means weakness until the proof is already in the room. Stay with me. We're right at that point. I want that on the record, too. From the 7th of April, I did not have a summons, I did not have standing, and I did not have a job to do. I was just a woman who'd been uninvited from being a bridesmaid. The rehearsal dinner was Friday the 11th, at the party room at Enzo's on Youngstown Road. Wes asked me to come. He asked me in a way I hadn't heard in months, standing in the kitchen with his hat in his hand like a kid. And he said, "Please, for me, one night." So I went, and I sat at the end of the long table, and I ate the chicken. Grant stood up before the cake and did a toast that everybody loved. He thanked Miss Charlene for the furnace comment he made about how she was the one who really warmed the house. He got a laugh. He said something about how a man knows when a family has decided to keep him. And then Kimber stood up pink and shining, and she raised her glass, and she said, "And thank you to everybody who supported us." Everybody. Even the ones who tried real hard not to. And she looked down the table at me and held it for about 3 seconds. 19 people laughed. I counted, because counting is what I do with my hands when I can't leave a room. I went out to the parking lot at 9:40 for air. He came out about a minute behind me. He had a cigarette he didn't light, and he stood a comfortable, friendly 4 feet away, and he looked out at the road like we were two people who'd stepped out together. He said, "You've been busy." I said nothing. He said, "You know what you don't have? You don't have a single thing. You've got a court website anybody can print off, and a face you think you remember." Then he turned and looked at me, and his voice never changed. Not once. That's the part that stays with me. He said, "And even if you had it, look in that room, Nadine. Look at every person in there and tell me which one picks you." I said, "Josie." His jaw moved. It was the only time. And then he said, "Wes told me about your mother, in the car, 11 days in a parking lot." He shook his head, sympathetic as a greeting card. That'd mark anybody. And he flicked the unlit cigarette into the gravel and said, "Monday we're gone. Come to the wedding. Don't come? Nobody's going to be looking at you either way." I drove home behind Wes's truck with my hands at 10 and 2. That night, I stood at the ironing board at 11:50 and pressed the beige dress because it had been in the garment bag since the christening, and it had lines across the middle. I did the collar and the 3 buttons at the throat and the hem. I hung it on the back of the bedroom door where I could see it from the bed. The envelope was 4 miles away in the glove box of a 2011 F-15. Oh, that belonged to Rudy Prewitt, who wears a tie, and who had not failed to put paper in a living man's hand in 31 years. Saturday, April 12th, was 54 degrees and gray with a wind off the lake. Wes left at 7:30 to set up chairs at the Elks. He kissed the top of my head on his way out and said, "Thank you for doing this." And I made a pot of coffee I didn't drink. Rudy called at 12:20. He was parked on the far side of the Zion lot, facing the doors, envelope on the passenger seat. He called again at 1:50. He said, "Deanie, I've got a problem." Grant hadn't come in his own truck. One of his groomsmen had driven him, a red Tahoe, and they'd pulled up to the kitchen door on the north side at 1:10 with 4 men around him like a wall and gone straight in. Rudy had gotten out and gotten about 20 feet before one of the groomsmen turned around and stood in the walkway with his arms folded and said the ceremony was private. And then Rudy had gone to the front doors and found 2 of Kimber's cousins standing there in matching gray vests with a printed guest list on a clipboard. Rudy Prewitt has walked into hospitals and casinos and a man's own retirement party. He said, "I can get in anywhere in this county with a tie. I cannot get past 2 men on a church door who've been told my name." He said, "I'll take him at the reception." And I said, "Rudy, he's not going to the reception." Because I'd been thinking about that parking lot at Enzo's for 13 hours. A man who has dodged service for 6 years does not stand in a rented hall for 4 hours. He'd do the ceremony and the pictures and 40 minutes at the Elks and then a hotel out by the turnpike under her name. Rudy was quiet on the line. Then he said, "Where are you right now?" I said, "Getting dressed." I got to Zion Lutheran at 2:40 in the afternoon in the beige dress with the 3 buttons and Kimber's little gold hoops under my hair. Rudy's truck was at the back of the lot by the dumpster enclosure. I walked over and he rolled the window down and handed the manila envelope out to me without a word. And then he dialed Ida and put her on speaker on the dash. Ida said, "Do you understand why I took it off you?" I said, "Optics." She said, "Optics were a luxury. We are out of luxury. Now shut up and listen, because I'm only saying this once, and then you're going to be doing it in front of people you love. and she gave me the same instructions she gave me in 2014, with a cigarette going in a coffee can. Identify him by his legal name, out loud. Tell him what the papers are. Put them in his hand. If he won't take them, set them down in his presence, at his feet, and say the words anyway, and note that you did. Do not touch him. Do not raise your voice. Do not argue with anyone about anything for any reason. Note the time to the minute. Note what he's wearing, his approximate height and weight, his hair, and any marks, and then leave. Ida said, "You are not there to be right. You are there to be accurate." I put the envelope in the bottom of my tote bag with a cardigan folded over it, and I walked in the side door by the kitchen. I have told you already what happened at 3 o'clock in the choir room. I'm going to tell you the part I left out. When Kimber stood up with that plastic cup, my tote bag was on the floor beside my left shoe. 12 pages, a rubber band, a folded piece of paper with a 4-year-old's name on it in a quartz typeface, 18 inches from my ankle. The wine came down the front of me, and I felt it go through to my slip, cold, and I thought about the $22, and the consignment place on Mahoning Avenue, and Charlene's hand on the back of my neck in 2012, and I did not move. Kimber said, "You never learn. Stand by the door and take the coats. Nobody's here to look at you." And I turned to the woman I had called Mom for 14 years, and I said, "Mom." And Charlene said, "Smile, Nadine. It's her day." So I smiled. It was not hard. I have never in my life had an easier time smiling, and I am not proud of that, and it's true. I picked up my bag off the floor, and I went and stood behind the coat table in the vestibule. I hung 41 coats between 3:15 and 4 o'clock. Denny, Wes's uncle, gave me his jacket and squeezed my arm and said, "There's my girl." A cousin from Kinsman said, "You look nice." And then her eyes went down to the wine, and she said, oh, honey," and went to find her seat. I gave out every paper tag. I straightened the sleeves so they'd hang right, because coats hung wrong get creases, and people noticed at the end of the night. At 3:58, I went out the side door into the alley by the dumpster enclosure, and I called a number in Boardman. Shay Lindquist picked up on the first ring. She'd been sitting at the BP on Route 5 in Cortland since 1 o'clock with the engine running. Josie was at Shay's sister's apartment with a coloring book because Shay had said from the very first conversation that her daughter was never going to be in a room where anybody had to explain her. I said, "He's here. Ceremony's at 4. If you leave now, you'll be here at 4:10. She said, "Okay." And I said, "Shay, I need you to hear the real reason I'm asking you to come, because if you don't want to do it, that's fine, and it changes nothing." She said, "Tell me." I said, "I've never had a positive identification on him. Not one, in a year. I've got a laugh and an eyebrow and a birthday off a website. When I swear that affidavit, I have to be able to say that the man I served is the respondent named in the complaint, and I need one person on this earth who can look at him and say his legal name out loud in front of witnesses." There was a pause, and then she said, very steady, "I've got the dress in the back seat." She'd bought it 3 weeks earlier at a Goodwill on Market Street for $9. Floor length, long sleeves, red. I'd told her, back in February, when this was all still a maybe, if the day ever comes, he has to be able to see you from the front of a room and know before one word is said out loud. The ceremony started at 4:04. Zion Lutheran is a plain church. White walls, dark beams, 22 rows of pews, a center aisle with a paper runner they roll out. There's a set of double doors at the back with a small square window in each one. Wes walked his sister down that aisle. Their father left in 2003 and hasn't been heard from, so it's been Wes since she was 7 years old at father-daughter things. He had an ivory boutonniere on his lapel, and he was wearing a suit I'd picked up from the tailor myself on Wednesday. Charlene was in the first row on the left in navy blue. Beau Everly stood at the front in a gray rented suit with his hands folded, and he watched my sister-in-law come up the aisle toward him. And he looked, I have to say it, like a man in love. At 4:09, I opened the door. She came in out of the gray afternoon in that $9 dress, and the wind came in with her and lifted the paper runner about 2 inches off the floor all the way up the aisle, and every head in the last 4 rows turned to see who was late. I took her windbreaker off her shoulders. I hung it on the last hook. I handed her paper tag number 42, and she closed her hand around it, and I put my hand flat on her back for 1 second. Then she walked 6 steps up the center aisle and stopped. The organ was still going. The pastor had the book open. Kimber was saying something to him, a little laugh, her veil pushed back. And Bo Everly looked over the top of his bride's head at the woman standing in the middle of the aisle in a red dress. I have watched a lot of men's faces. At the exact second they understand who I am, I have seen surprise and rage and that gray flat nothing that means somebody's about to run. I had never seen what happened to his face. He went down sideways. He didn't crumple, he tipped, all at once like something with the bolts pulled out. He hit the front pew with his shoulder and took the brass candle stand with him. And the unity candle came out of the holder and rolled down the 2 carpeted steps and stopped against the runner. The organ stopped in the middle of a bar. Then everything at once. Kimber screaming his name. The best man on his knees. Somebody yelling for water, like water has ever helped anybody. 200 people standing up at once, so the whole room got taller. I picked up my tote bag off the coat table and I walked up the aisle. 22 rows. I know it was 22 because I counted them on the way I count things. And my hands were steady, and I was wearing a beige dress with a wine stain from my throat to my knees, and not one person in that church looked at anything else. At the front, Shay Lindquist said it, clear, not loud, the way you'd read a name off a form. She said, "That's Beauregard Everly, Beauregard Grant Everly, Jr. That's him." Kimber's head came up. He was on his side on the carpet with his collar open and his color coming back, and his eyes were tracking, and the best man had a hand under his neck. I knelt down about 2 feet from him on the step, and I took the envelope out of my bag. I said, "Beauregard Grant Everly, Jr." He looked at me. I said, "These are legal papers from the Trumbull County Juvenile Court. You're being served with a complaint to establish paternity and for an order of support, along with a summons and the court's standing orders. Your response date is on the front page." And I put them in his hand, and his fingers closed on them because a man on his back takes what you hand him. 4:11 in the afternoon. I stood up and stepped back 2 paces, and I said it into my phone, out loud, in front of everybody, because Ida taught me to, and because there was going to be a lawyer someday. 4:11 p.m., April 12th. Personal service on the respondent, Sanctuary of Zion Lutheran Church, Todd Avenue, Warren. White male, brown hair, approximately 6 foot, 200 pounds, gray suit, ivory boutonniere, scar through the left eyebrow, identity confirmed on site by the petitioner, papers received in his right hand. Then Kimber hit me. Not hard and not well. She came off the steps with both hands, and she got my shoulder and the side of my jaw with the flat of her palm, and her veil comb came out and hung in her hair, and she was screaming, "You did this, you did this, you did this." And Ashlyn and one of the salon girls got their arms around her from behind. I didn't put my hands up. Do not touch him. Do not argue with anyone, about anything, for any reason. Charlene came out of the first pew. She stopped in front of me, and she was not screaming. Charlene Ruddick has never screamed in her life. She looked at the wine on my dress, and she looked at my face, and she said 4 words. She said, "Get out of this church." I looked past her at my husband. Wes was standing exactly where he had been standing when he handed his sister off, 3 feet from the pastor, with the ivory boutonniere on his lapel and both hands at his sides. He was looking right at me. He had a clear path. There was nothing between him and me but carpet. He didn't move. I've decided it isn't fair to say he chose. A choice is a thing you do. He just stood there, And the standing there was the whole answer. And it took about 11 seconds. Bernadette Colsar, the wedding coordinator at Zion, who has run somewhere over 400 weddings in that building, came up beside me and put her hand under my elbow and turned me around and walked me down the aisle without hurrying. And at the doors, she said, quietly, "Take your time, honey. Don't run." Behind me, on the floor, with the paper still in his hand, Bo Everly said one word, and 200 people heard it. And it was not a denial, and it was not a question. He said, "Shay." Kimber stopped screaming. I got my coat off the last hook. I gave Shay her windbreaker. We went out through the double doors into the wind, and the doors swung shut behind us on that noise. And Rudy Prewitt was standing at the bottom of the steps by his truck with his hat in his hands. 4:19. Shay was shaking too hard to get her key in the ignition, so we sat in my truck with the heat on, and she held that little paper coat check tag, number 42, in her fist the whole time. Service was complete at 4:11. It was done, and it was clean, and a court in that county now had a man by the sleeve for the first time in 6 years. Except a court doesn't know anything until somebody hands it a piece of paper. The affidavit still had to be typed, sworn, notarized, and filed at window 3, and the Trumbull County Juvenile Court Clerk's office had closed at 4:30 on Friday and would not open again until 8:30 Monday morning. There was a U-Haul on Elm Road with Everly on the reservation, due out at 9. I typed the affidavit Saturday night at my kitchen table at 9:40 in sweatpants, with the beige dress soaking in cold water in the sink because I still thought at that point that it might come out. Ida notarized it Sunday afternoon at her own kitchen table in Cortland in a housecoat with her stamp and her book. She read every line twice. When she got to the part where I'd written the time as 4:11 p.m., she looked up and said, "You're sure?" I said it out loud into a phone while I was still on my knees. She stamped it. At 8:41 on Monday morning, I stood at window 3 at the Trumbull County Juvenile Court Clerk's office and slid it under the glass to a woman named Peg who has been behind that window since I was in high school. She date-stamped the original and the copy, handed the copy back and said, "Have a good one, hun." That's what it looks like. There's no music. It's a rubber stamp and a woman who wants her coffee. The U-Haul left Elm Road at 9:15 that morning and it went to Tennessee. It didn't matter. That's the thing I wish somebody had explained to Shay Lindquist 2 years earlier when she was calling numbers that didn't ring. He could drive to Murfreesboro. He could drive to Alaska. At 11 minutes past 4 on a Saturday afternoon, in a church on Todd Avenue, a court in Trumbull County, Ohio put its hand on that man's shoulder, and 460 miles does not take a hand off a shoulder. That is the entire reason my job exists. There was no wedding. Pastor Lindemann did not perform a ceremony over a man being carried out to a folding chair in the narthex. The marriage license sat in the drawer in Bernadette Colxer's office, unsigned until it expired 60 days later, and Bernadette mailed it back to the probate court herself. Here is what happened after, in order, because the order matters. May 2nd, the review date, the one where the case was supposed to die. It didn't die. Roz Vonderhoff walked in with my stamped affidavit, and the court converted it to a pretrial. He appeared by telephone from Tennessee with an attorney his mother paid for. The court ordered genetic testing. June 3rd, a collection site in a strip mall in Murfreesboro. A cheek swab, 4 minutes. July 1st, the report. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. September 18th, the adjudication and support hearing. Judgment entry establishing Beauregard G. Everly, Jr. as the father of Josie Lindquist, born 2021. Child support set at $684 a month off his own income affidavit. Back support to the filing date, 34 months, $23,256 on a payment plan with interest. He's a 1099 contractor, so there's no employer to send a withholding order to. And his lawyer clearly thought that was worth something. It isn't. Ohio suspends a driver's license at 90 days in arrears. A territory sales rep without a driver's license is not a territory sales rep. He has paid every month. And on the same entry, on the second page, in the standard paragraph nobody ever reads out loud in a hallway, the court ordered the newly established father to provide a complete family medical history to the child's treating physicians. He faxed it on October 2nd. Shay sent me a picture of it. That intake page from Akron Children's, the one with the grid on the second page and the 2 columns, maternal in her blue ballpoint all the way down. And the right-hand column filled in somebody else's handwriting in a different pen. His mother, arrhythmia, diagnosed at 44. An uncle, bypass at 60. A grandfather, sudden cardiac death at 52. 52. That last one is the kind of line a cardiologist reads twice. Josie's murmur turned out to be a benign flow murmur, which is what they thought all along, and she is 5 now and completely fine, and she is going to be fine. But there is a piece of paper in a hospital in Akron that will follow that child for 80 years, and both halves of it are full, and it took a court order and a church aisle to fill in 9 lines. The little boy in Youngstown is named Colson. He's 8 now. Roz handed the Mahoning County file to a colleague, and Danica Pfeiffer refiled in June. That one was served in 11 days by a man in Rutherford County, Tennessee, at a documented address, because that's the other thing an affidavit does. Once a man is in a record, he is in the record. He had spent 6 years making sure no piece of paper anywhere had a current address on it, and 11 minutes past 4 on the 12th of April put one there, permanently, in his own state's docket, for anybody with a keyboard. Now, the part that costs. Kimber went to Tennessee anyway. She stayed 5 weeks and came back in the middle of June and moved into her old bedroom at Charlene's, and as far as I know, she's still there. She did not marry him. She tells it that I did it because I was jealous. Some version of that is still going around, and I'd say about a third of that family believes it, and there is no piece of paper in the world that fixes that. I stopped trying in about August. Bernadette Kulsar called me in May. She'd had 4 people ask her what really happened at Zion that day, and she told all 4 of them the same thing, which was that a woman in a stained dress knelt down and said a man's legal name and gave him an envelope and then left without raising her voice. She said, "I've done 400 weddings, honey. I've seen people throw punches over a seating chart. You conducted yourself." Charlene didn't call for 11 weeks. She called in July on a Tuesday and asked me to come to the cookout on the 20th. She said everybody was ready to let it be. She said, "You'll apologize to your sister and we'll put it away." I said, "Mom, all I ever asked you to do was look at a website for 40 seconds. And Charlene said, "It was never about the website, Nadine." She's right. It never was. It was about who is allowed to be believed in that house. And I had always known the answer to that and had spent 14 years pretending I didn't because I was so grateful to be let in the door. I said, "I'm not going to apologize." She said, "Then I guess that's that." And we hung up, and that was the last time I spoke to her. In November, a package came. Charlene's handwriting on it, no return address, no note inside. The green terry cloth robe, washed and folded, with the iron burn still on the sleeve. I don't know what she meant by it. I've decided I don't have to. Wes came home at 11 o'clock that Saturday night, still in the suit. He sat down on the edge of the bed and he said, "Why couldn't you have just waited 2 days?" I asked him one question. I've asked myself since whether it was fair. And I've decided it was. I said, "When she poured it on me, why didn't you get up?" And my husband said, "I didn't know what to do." That's the truest thing anybody said to me that whole year. I moved out the first weekend in May into the apartment over Ida's office, which is 1 bedroom and a kitchen and a radiator that bangs. Wes carried my file boxes down the stairs himself, all 22 logbooks. And in the driveway, he put them in the truck bed and squared them up so they wouldn't slide, the way he squares up everything. And then he stood there with his hand on the tailgate and cried. He was not a bad man. He was a man who found out exactly what he was in 11 seconds in front of 200 people, and so did I. And neither one of us was ever going to be able to unknow it. I filed in September. Rudy served him at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening, and he wore a tie to do it because Rudy wears a tie. Wes signed everything. He didn't contest one line. It was final on the 11th of February, and I took my own name back. And I have been Nadine Kozar for a year and 4 months now, which is longer than it sounds. Ida had a stent put in January and started saying the word retirement out loud. She sold me the business in March. $40,000 over 6 years on a handwritten note at her kitchen table, no bank, no lawyer, just the two of us and her stamp. She still comes in Tuesdays and sits in the front room and tells me I'm too soft on the billing. The sign went on the glass door in April. Gold vinyl, done by a man in Girard who does storefronts. Kozar, legal support, N. Kozar, appointed process server, Trumbull County. I never got the stain out. I soaked it. And then a woman at a cleaner's in Niles held it up to the window and told me the truth, which is that red wine that sat 11 hours on beige is a dye job now, not a stain. She said she could take $20 off me and hand it back the same, so I kept it the way it is. It hangs on the back of my office door on a wooden hanger, buttoned all 3 buttons at the throat. Not as a monument. I'm not a woman who builds monuments. It hangs there because it is the last thing I ever wore as somebody's daughter-in-law, and because on the day I wore it, I did my job correctly, and I want to see both of those things at the same time when I turn around from my desk. Taped to the door frame next to it is a paper coat check tag with a 42 on it and a photograph Shay mailed me in December. Josie at 5, missing a tooth, holding up a piece of hospital paper with both columns full, grinning at somebody off to the left of the camera. I get to the office at 7:40. Ida's coffee can is still on the windowsill, and I have never moved it. I unlock that glass door with my own key, on a ring that has 3 keys on it now, because the week I moved out, I took the Marion Street house key off it and dropped it in Charlene's mailbox on my way to work, and I did it at 6 in the morning so nobody would have to come out on the porch. There were 11 new files on my desk this morning. 11 people in this county who do not want to be found, and somebody on the other end of every one of them waiting on a piece of paper. I put the coffee on, and I take the first folder off the top, and I open my book to a clean line. I'm Clara, and this is my channel. I love making these stories and sharing them with people across the world. If this one found you at the right time, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.